Today we are going to be talking about experimental theater. I'm going to start with the history and where this all comes from, this movement, and tell you a little bit, if you don't know what experimental theater is, what it is and what it consists of. Our discussion today is going to be relying heavily on the history of Bertolt Brecht. So if you know me, you know that I love Brecht, and hopefully today you understand a little bit about why I do. This is a much more didactic kind of lecture than the directing series. This is going to be me using a lot of notes, because this stuff is stuff that's not already ingrained in my brain. So the other thing is that I didn't use any books for this. I used things that I printed off the web. So at the bottom of this, once it's posted, in the down bar, I will put all the links to the essays that I read to get this stream going. Great. I'm glad the stream's working for right now. Fingers crossed. Okay. So we're going to start with Brecht and see where he goes and what his influence has done to modern theater. I am not going to address modern theater. I'm going to do that next week. And I'm just going to give us a preface all the way up to it. And then next week's series is going to be entitled Where Theater Is Now. So if you have this, you're going to know where it's come from the whole time, if that makes sense. Okay, so Brecht is born in Germany in 1898, I think. And he lived until the 50s, where he died. He had a heart condition, so a lot of his childhood was spent battling this heart condition, and he started to write because he was indoors a lot. And we hear this a lot about famous people, which I think is kind of interesting. So he was a weird dude. I'm not going to pretend that he wasn't, and I'm not going to, go over things that don't need to be said in this theater lecture, but he was a wild child. He had lots of mistresses, lots of wives, lots of illegitimate children, and was inherently very interested in the delicacies and finer points of life. Let's just put it that way. So, love him or hate him, he turned into this really great artist, and I'm going to tell you how that happened. His family was very upper class, the bourgeois, and they didn't have to hide it. His dad was very, very high class in society, and Brecht always resented that. He became the people's man, and a lot of his plays revolve around this. So he didn't like that. However, ironically, even though he didn't like being part of the upper class, he allowed his father to support him financially and with a house and a home for much of his adult life. So he did rely on that standard of living, but didn't actually believe in it. It's weird. Okay, so that's where a lot of his strife comes from. He decides that he's not going to do medical school anymore. He was supposed to be a doctor, and he decides, hey, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to start being a theater critic for a newspaper. And that's where this all starts. He starts to go see theater, he starts to make connections, and this is all in Germany, and then he starts to travel around to see different theaters. He began writing plays when he fled from Nazi Germany, and he went to, he was all over the place, but he did actually come to America in LA, and he was part of that witch hunt that, Arthur Miller was part of, and we talk about that sometimes, where people were blacklisted. Well, they took him in for questioning to say, are you part of this anti-American communist movement? And he flew to Switzerland the next day. So he got out of this country, but he did reside here for quite a while. He went back to East Berlin in 1948, and he set up the theater troupe there that made Epic Theater. And I'm going to contrast that with some other historical things happening at the same time, so you know how this is so different from anything that we have seen up until this point. Theater was very happy. Theater was very traditional. It was, and still is to this day, a lot of theater, dedicated to Aristotle's, this is the way a comedy should be, this is the way a tragedy should be, very plot driven. And the Epic Theater was anything but. It changed that and transformed it into something that is more what we would consider performance art, or something that was more modern. This happens in this era, and we hadn't seen this yet. So the Epic Theater, it had little cause and effect between the scenes, so they weren't connected in any linear format. It was more like a episodes. They were very preachy in nature. A lot of times actors didn't stand for actors. They weren't like going through a character development. Actors were symbols of like one actor could be the upper class. They could symbolize that. Or one actor could be women, but they symbolize that as their character. So it was very, didn't concentrate on character development at all. And the audience is the audience, and the actors are the actors, and Epic Theater was there to say something to the audience and to prove normally a political point. It focused on cruel action, and this is where we tie it together with some of the works that are going on in New York City and other places right now, some of these modern works, where we see brutality and sexuality and a lot of things that we don't normally see on stage that make the audience uncomfortable. And it wasn't just for shock value. We'll talk about that in a minute, but they did set out to make the audience feel uncomfortable in a way that made them think after the show. The ideas were to pitch out the subject matter, whatever it may be, and then have the audience think about it as they left the theater and then go make social change from it. So the theater was not what changed society. It was the people that came to see the theater that would then go change society. And that's a huge point about the Epic Theater that I think a lot of people get wrong. It wasn't political theater that was there to influence the minds and then change the world. It didn't work like that. They were there to make the audience make their own decision about, Brecht had a background in journalism, so he was very into putting out the issues and then having the audience decide for themselves. So yes, cool. There was never, in these shows, they were often, company written. There was never any climax, no denouement. It's just a series of episodes that show you a scenario that's happening in society. Each episode was complete within itself. So you could come drop in, or this is some of the theater we see today where you go from place to place to see different parts of the theater. And I think some kids at McLean were working on a show like that, where you go and you see different pieces in different places. Well, since these were episodic in nature, you could do that. It wasn't about the theater building at all. So you could have theater wherever you wanted to, and we're seeing a lot of that with the immersive theater happening in the movement today. I'm going to keep tying it to today, but next week is going to be more about today's theater. It was meant to provoke the audience to reform society by challenging common ideologies. And so people hopefully were coming to the theater thinking that they thought they knew and then leaving with new information that they never knew. And I'm inspired by this. Even though this was in the 1940s and 50s, this movement still inspires me with as much political strife that we have going on in this country. And I am inspired to make art just like Brecht was out of his circumstances. So I firmly believe that this will make a comeback, and I will tell you some shows in which this kind of style of theater is making a comeback. So I'm just going to run down Brechtian techniques. He's so cool that he has his own Brechtian nomenclature. Emphasis on theatricality. So he wanted to see all the lights. He wanted the audience to see where the light was coming from. It's not this mystical, magical theater world. This is a person, a human being that we're putting on stage, and these are the lights we're lighting this human being so you can see him or her in the light. Basically, bare bones theater. Very, very minimalistic. The spectator participates productively, so a lot of this was call and response, or it was putting things on stage that were kind of questionable and making the audience make their own judgment about what they were seeing. It asked questions, oftentimes directly to the audience, and other times through staging. The alienation effect. So Brecht was very big into this alienation. Marx said that alienation is necessary before the desire for change can arise. So he would take something out of real life and alienate it to the point where you couldn't see any other view about it. Like, for example, like if it was about war or something, he would have there's this thing we're going to talk about called gestures and the jest. This comes from Brecht. So he would have, instead of just having soldiers march across the stage, and this is the classic example, you could think whatever you want. You could think nationality, you could think patriotism, whatever about soldiers. But if you put some dead bodies and they walk on top of the dead bodies across the stage, then that's making a statement where the audience can't avoid it. It's alienating this simple gesture to a point where the statement can't be ignored. And he was really into that. And I think a lot of the theater that we see now at these smaller venues it is still kind of practicing. The Laramie Project, I'm going to refer to it a lot. Hopefully you've seen it or you've been in it. A lot of it is alienation. And there's a fence that's in the middle of the show, and most every production has this fence. It's a fence. It's just a normal fence, but it's dead center, and we look at it the entire time, and it's where Matthew Shepard died. So alienating that piece so you can't ignore it, actually focusing in on it is pretty awesome. So then, hi Yvonne and Ben, I saw you guys. Hey. Okay, so after that, we have kind of a tie to the Greeks here. So the theater is very presentational, and if you want to go see Brecht, there's Brecht that still happens. I don't know if it's good Brecht or bad Brecht. I'm not the judge of that, but plays like the Caucasian Chalk Circle, fantastic. And if you go see a show like this, you will see some of the presentational aspects that I'm telling you. A lot of times Brecht is in the round. A lot of times there are no costumes. People are just wearing black, or they're wearing some unifying color, and it's exciting. It's exciting to watch because you never know what's going to happen, and you're an active participant in the audience. Even though I don't like feeling like that as an introvert, it's exciting. So get over it and go see a Brecht show if you see one near you. The archetypal characters, we talked about this before. They played into the stereotypes. They exaggerated them so much, the stereotypes, that again you couldn't miss the point. And the ensemble actors stay on stage the whole time. So if you saw my production of the Laramie Project, or you were part of it, I will try to dissect what part of it. I directed that in a completely Brechtian style without drawing too much attention to it because we had a short time frame. But the ensemble stayed on stage the entire time. It's written in episodes. So we had episodes and the light was very, very stark. It moved from point A to point B on the stage. The company served as those archetypal characters, and then we had the people interviewing them that broke that fourth wall. Brecht didn't believe in a fourth wall. He's like, we are the theater is us, there's no fourth wall. So we broke that, and we had the interviewers talk directly to the audience, if you remember, and then we moved through the stage in a very simplistic way. We just set it on a mountain in the dirt and had TV cameras. So there was a lot of political messages there that you couldn't really miss. So I'll keep going back to the Laramie Project as I go through, and hopefully that can make some connections for you to Brecht. Okay, epic acting. So Brechtian acting. Here are the hallmarks of it. Demonstrates rather than imitates. Shows you something. Doesn't tell you about it. It shows you. It's normally in the past tense. A lot of times the stage directions were read. Yeah. The gestures were used to indicate inner feelings, so it was much more of a physical theater. Instead of being inside here and crying if you're sad or something, big sad gestures would have been used to indicate that feeling. And indicating in a natural sense of acting is not good, but in a Brechtian sense, it's integral and necessary. Actors addressed the audience. Characters were often given titles, like Black Woman would be your title as your character. We see this in a lot of shows still today, and I'm going to get to Kushner's Angels in America. If you've seen that show or the HBO movie, oh my goodness, that is crossing the Brecht line as well. So I'll try to give you some more recommendations of things you can see in this style. Design, epic design, Brechtian design, no fourth wall, minimal props. Set changes happen in view of the audience, and there was only one representative prop per person normally. This is my thing. And that was in the Laramie Project as well. Any set changes that happened. Everybody got up and moved right in front of the audience. The lighting was flood the stage with harsh white light, make everything as stark as possible, leave the stage lamps in full view, and obvious lighting that constantly reminds the audience that they're watching a play. So, yeah. And the epic playwriting. So if you were going to set out to write an epic theater version play, you would have something that was structured episodically. You would have awareness of events in the past, and that's your audience. You would speak to an audience that had an awareness of those events so that they knew what you were talking about. So we're talking about Matthew Shepard, and we're doing the Laramie Project, but we are assuming that the audience knows at least a little bit about who Matthew Shepard was and how that affected our society when that happened in the 90s. And you would tell the audience through labels, and you would have a clear message in the play that you're writing. Okay, epic directing, just a couple of points here. You decide the blocking for the actors, because the whole idea is that you're directing kind of a political piece that the audience can then go change the world with. So you tell the actors where to stand, what to do. It's a much different... it's more like what we would consider performance art now, and we're going to talk a lot about that next week. It's more like that. So you want to tell the actors where to stand. You want to clarify the structure of human relationships. If you have the king come in and he has a crown on and he's looking down on everyone, you want to make sure that that's very clear. Your staging and your images are symbolic. So it's really, really important that the director gets in there and makes sure that those... In the film world, we call it mise en scène, to make sure that the scene, that if you took a picture of the stage, was very indicative of the message you are trying to portray. Okay, and and the audience must remain critically aware. As soon as your audience gets emotionally invested in the show, it's no longer an epic theater piece. The audience should be emotionally invested in their own lives and how this piece is bringing out things that are happening in their own world around them. And I know we're talking theoretical here, so I will work to try to put this in context for you, but I have a lot of information that I want to get out and keep going. So that is our good friend Brecht. He was against naturalistic theater. He thought that the audience hang up their brains with their hats at the coat room when they come in. That's a quote from him. So he really wanted the audience to think while they were, and I can't say it enough, to think while they were watching his theater. The V effect. This is one of his coined terms. The V effect is to make the spectator adopt an attitude of inquiry and criticism in the approach to the incident. So you're putting something out there that then the audience is deciding whether or not they agree with it or whether they want to criticize it. So I think this is really important, a really important lecture for you to watch if you are a theater critic, if you're a Cappies critic, or you're a critic like working for Joel or anything like that, and you're watching theater. It's important to know the type and the genre of theater and what they should be going for, because if I were watching some of this and I didn't know anything about epic theater or Brecht or anything like that, the style of theater, I would say, oh, the actors indicated the whole time and they played into stereotypes, and I would be reviewing something that was false. I would be reviewing exactly what they were trying to do. And if I were the director and looked at a review like that, I would say, oh, fantastic, mission accomplished. So it's really cool that you're here to listen to this, everybody. And hopefully you'll see some more examples of this theater coming forward, because it is very, very powerful. He thought in the V effect, he thought the stage should be purged of anything magical. So you tech kids watching, if you ever are involved in a Brechtian show, this is pretty awesome, because your work gets showcased and special effects are null and void. Everything is very apparent to the audience. You might even be asked as a tech person to walk across the stage in your all black clothing and change a scene or pull in a backdrop or, something like that. You are showcased. For the first time, you don't have to hide. Brechtian acting and shows love to see the tech going on. Again, constantly reminded that we're watching a play. Sometimes they would have signs at the start of scenes, like placards that said, like, scene, kind of like at the boxing ring or something, round 1 or something like that. And they would tell you where you were, what you were supposed to be concentrating on in the scene. Again, connecting the actor to the audience. The acting style in a Brechtian show, I know I talked a little bit about it, but I just want to go over one more thing. It's about the grotesque. Brecht was obsessed with this idea of grotesque and what a society considers to be grotesque. And of course that changes from generation to generation. But a lot of things that we saw in American Idiot, if you've seen that musical, that very Brechtian in nature, as when Johnny comes to the front to address the audience. Not a completely Brechtian show or epic show by any means, but it had a lot. What's her name is a symbolic character. It had a lot of same ties here. And the grotesque, for example, making something beautiful out of the heroine dance, or the post-traumatic stress being this beautiful dance that happens. So really tying those things in and playing with what is grotesque and how you can make that appear on stage, and really challenging an audience's perceptions of what is grotesque, and maybe showing it from a different perspective is something like the heroine dance. We think people go in not having any experience with heroin, just knowing what they know and say heroin's horrible, it's terrible, why would people do this, and we're so judgmental. And then all of a sudden we see this beautiful dance happen where these people are connecting and we see the effect that it has on the mind, and now I understand how people can get addicted to something like that. It feels and looks beautiful, and I've never seen it from that perspective before. It's very, very epic theater like in that scene. And St. Jimmy, he's another great epic drama figure. He's a stereotype. He is a symbol of, okay, I'm not going to go quoting, but you know what I'm saying, okay? So we can pick a lot of these parts out, and if you're ever directing a show or you get involved in a show that has pieces of epic drama in it, it's a stylistic choice. And for a show like American Idiot, you can't ignore that. You can't just have Johnny talk to his friends and not talk to the audience when he really needs to. And breaking that fourth wall is something that Brecht started. So we're really excited that this is coming back again in Broadway and in big theater shows across the world. So Brecht believed, I like this for you tech people watching, Brecht believed in using acting, dance, music, song, mask, chorus, signs, and film projection montage together in their own right. Not everything at once, not everything to tell a story, but using those in a simple way to get what you wanted. Putting up a stark white sheet and using one light and using some shadow play. He would do something like that. That was very, very, like Pilobolus style. A lot of that came out of this theater. This very bare bones way of using these technical things in a very, very specific way, in a very specific combination, montage, to make something pop and make something impactful. And this is where we get performance art. But these were full-length plays that he wrote. And if you want to read some Brecht, there's some in the Norton Anthology. I mean, Caucasian Chalk Circle or Mother of Courage are some of his most famous works. But some of my favorite works are like Galileo and things like that, I think are great. There's a Threepenny Opera version he did too. He liked to play with classics and kind of twist them around too. Let me get back to you on that. I have to remember. Okay, and then we have the postmoderns. This is where I'm going to get into. After Brecht dies, he had a contemporary. Actually, let me just mention, Artaud was his contemporary, and he liked theater the exact opposite way. And some of the experimental theater that we see today is actually his style of theater, and this comes out of France. So we had Brecht in Germany and other places in the north, and then we had Artaud in France. He thought problems weren't societal like Brecht. He thought they were inside, so more like Freud and the id and the ego and that kind of thing. He thought they were part of the subconscious, and he thought that the theater needed to stir up feelings by stirring up pain. So he really tried to get and this was a different kind of experimental theater at the time, the theater of the oppressed, and he tried to stir up this pain and have the audiences cry and leave the theater having been changed while at the theater. Brecht wanted people to change after they left the theater, go and change the world. Artaud said, hey, I want people to be changed in their seats and leave this theater a changed person. Okay, he liked visual and oral explosions on stage. Every special effect that he could get his hands on, he wanted. He wanted visual surprises, violence, shock, awe. Action should surround the audience. A lot of times people would be popping up out of the audience and they would encase the audience. He would do performances in broken down factories, in plane hangars, big open areas where he could totally immerse the audience. And this is, so I'm giving you the precursor Brecht to the experimental kind of social theater we're seeing now, but the immersive theater that we're seeing now is coming straight out of this different movement at the same time. This is happening in the same beginning half of the 1900s to the 1950s. So then there are huge puppets and instruments, unidentifiable lighting. So these are magical lighting effects coming from within. Theater of cruelty. So he focused on confrontation to face things buried in the subconscious. Very difficult to watch, this kind of theater. It makes you seriously uncomfortable. It makes you feel all the feels, but not in a good way, and you leave the theater kind of shell-shocked. And I talk about this production all the time, and some of you, when you went to Scotland, saw the production of, you know what I'm talking about. Help me out. Trainspotting. Nope. Yep. Nope. Yep. Nope. Okay, can't remember. Anyways, it was a really immersive theater, and it was so hard to watch. They were doing real drugs. They were defecating. It was real. And that's where this stuff... That's what I think it's Trainspotting, right? Am I wrong? I can't remember. Okay. You know me and the brain. But that kind of theater where you leave like shell-shocked and you're shaking in your boots, that's the kind of theater where this Artaud stuff really comes from. So I just wanted to draw the two distinctions. The more experimental side is going to be the Brecht stuff, because Artaud was just blown out of proportion theater that makes you feel uncomfortable. But Brecht is really redefining the genre of theater, and not that one is better than the other, but where we're going is the Brechtian path. But I just wanted to mention that so you knew what was happening in context. Okay, cool. I think I've covered all of that. I have so many pages of notes, you guys, you don't even know. Now, in the 60s, our favorite time, we get into postmodernism. And this is a movement away from the avant-garde. And the avant-garde in this country has had a huge tradition. This is, fashion shows, a meat dress, that kind of thing. Big, bold statements that are for the sake of art. Okay? The avant-garde in drama never really quite took off. It never really worked because we were either looking for a message or a plot, or we were looking for something. These visuals, this performance art never really took off. So this 1960s postmodern movement in drama comes to save the theater in the face of the avant-garde art world. And it takes eclectic and self-reflective mix of different styles from different time periods. Self-reflection became huge. So we self-reflect on ourselves as audience members, as ourselves as actors, of ourselves as playwrights. So much self-reflective work comes out of this postmodern era. There's a thing where the actor and the director become one person, this superstar, and the writer and the director become a superstar. So people like Peter Brook, we mentioned him a couple of weeks ago, Grotowski, who I'm going to talk about in a minute, Peter Sellers, these people start to make these companies that are rocking and rolling in New York because they have their minds made up. They've written the play and they know how to direct it and they know what they want to say. So they're taking all of these traditions and they're packing them together in this own concoction to make these shows that are very standalone. The postmodern theater were very individualized kind of shows where you never knew what you were quite going to get. Each of these directors and writers, the one person, developed their own kind of style and developed their own kind of way and methods. A lot of our methods come out of this time period. Our Adlers and Peter Brook and Meisner, it all comes out of this where people are trying to find their way and trying to find the best way. So, we work at this point in time, say we, like I was there, I wasn't, but they were working at breaking down boundaries between dramatic forms and performance styles, and they were working on the boundaries between art themselves. And this is where we get, light shows and adding music underscore to dramatic pieces and reworking things Shakespeare that hadn't been done in this way before. These things are so happening in New York right now and across the world. Postmodernism has not ended for us. We are still in this eclectic mix of everything that's come before us and where it's going to go. So we start to see in this era women and I'm going to talk about this next week too, but women directing and writing theater and winning successfully. Susan Laurie Parks and Julie Taymor, and these people are coming out of the woodwork. Ethnic people that weren't white guys, writing and directing theater of all ethnicities. Amazing things starts to happen, and we start to get these pairings of people that are from different nationalities and making these hybrid forms of art and theater and performance art that we hadn't seen before. So it's a really exciting time. Environmental theater. So this term happens right around now. It's very close to immersive theater, which is the key word right now. But this environmental theater is, Richard Segner said, it's something in between traditional productions and happenings. So all the production elements speak in their own language rather than being mere support for words. The text need not be the starting point or the goal of production, and the text may not even be necessary. He presents theater as like an experience. You're in the environment and something happens. So we get plays that start to come out of this and are still very, like American Idiot, set in a 7-Eleven parking lot. If we actually went to 7-Eleven and did it, we could have some kind of experiential theater, environmental theater. The idea, and okay, put on your thinking caps for a second. This is the idea that environmental theater brings up. Does the play even exist at all before it's staged? Like, does it exist? Is a play on paper truly a play? Or should that have a different word for it before it's staged? Once it's staged, it becomes some kind of theatrical performance, yes. And he's advocating, and this environmental theater is saying that the environment in which the theater is performed is the play. So you don't even need a script. You just need to be in the environment to experience the art that's being put up. I know this is like really heightened language that I'm using, but if you can kind of get your head around it, dropping the script is huge. We start to drop the script, and then this opens the door for people like Martha Graham to come in and do amazing dance work. It opens, so many. As soon as we drop the script, we can concentrate on every other thing. We can concentrate on texture, on sense, on temperature. Every single sense that you can use, rhythm and movement. We start to see all these cool pieces emerge, and we start to call them theater, even though before we wouldn't have. We would have said theater needs a plot, it needs a curtain, a stage, it needs to be open and closed, it needs characters, and now we have Brecht opening the door and saying, actually, theater can be this, which opens the door for more people to say, well, if Brecht pushed it that far, let me see if I can push it even farther and see if we can call this theater, even though it doesn't have any characters or a plot. And this really, really takes off, especially in New York. Okay, this kind of theater, the idea of this Herbert Blau said this. The idea of performance has become the mediating, often subversive third term in the on-again, off-again marriage of drama and theater. So in order to join drama and theater, if we don't want to call it one or the other, we call it performance. Performance art, as I'm going to talk about next week, has taken on a life of its own in the last 20 years, and that's like 15-minute pieces. These had no limits on them. These weren't something, we've kind of limited ourselves in the performance art realm, modern performance art, but at the time, anything goes. They are, in the environmental theater, concerned less with what they're saying, with content, and more with form and formal experiment. With the means of communicating the places where theatrical events take place, the persons employed as performers, and the relationship of performers as well as the performers to the audience. They were more concerned with the place, with the environment, where they were at the time. It's like doing a play about 9/11 on Ground Zero. How powerful would that be? You don't even need a script. You just need to go there and make some art happen in the environment that is impactful. Or a play about claustrophobia in an elevator. It's all about the surroundings and making sure that people are feeling and being affected, and the audience and the performer, there's a relationship there. Okay, then after environmental theater, and still in postmodern, in the 1960s, we get experimental theater. This is a huge umbrella. The experimental theater, Brecht is experimental theater. Okay, Grotowski's theater, we'll get there, of the poor that's coming up, is experimental. But this term starts in the 1960s. Okay. It's often interchanged with avant-garde, but as we've said, avant-garde is something different. So I really want to encourage you to use the term experimental theater when you're talking about dramatic performance art pieces. Hopefully that makes sense. It is when a work is not based in a text, it is seen as an experiment. Each performance is a development of the work as a product. So these are largely company-based performance pieces, and they are developed with the company, and they are put on each time a little bit differently. They make changes to them, or they use impulse. This is where impulse comes, and we love to talk about impulse. This comes from experimental theater. So I will get there in a second. It largely represents itself as alienated from the established order, where the primary aim is to shock the audience and interrogate the complacence of the high class culture. So this is the theater for the people. This is questioning what they think they know. This is so much of Brecht. All that political stuff is coming back. We're experimenting in a way that was open the doors from this postmodern movement, and we're putting theater on stage, or not on a stage, that is organic, it is living, and is changing with every performance. So it becomes immediate. The immediacy to want to see these shows, to see it once and then come back a week later and see where it's gone, or to see how one audience member can change the whole show by vocal reaction. It's fresh, and people start to flock to the theater, these small theater spaces, to see these shows and to see what's going to happen, because you just never know. It's very immediate. Then we have the Theater of the Cruelty. Quick mention, if you've heard of this, derives from Artaud, and the theater must disturb the spectators profoundly and force men to view themselves as they really are. This same thing comes back in the experimental theater phase. You get these shocking pieces of theater, and I'm not saying that Brecht can't be shocking, but that was not his primary goal, was to shock. But a lot of people jump on this bandwagon of pizzazz and shock value, and we see a lot of theater, especially during these the war protest years in the Vietnam, protesting the war. We see a lot of shocking theater at this point. So if you're interested in that kind of theater, this is the time period to go back and research. And hopefully this whole lecture is giving you things that you can then go research, because I know it's very broad in nature, but it's a lot of information. So today's theater, that's what I want to talk about a little bit, and how we're going. Okay, so on the way to today's theater, we stopped at postmodernism, and we got to the Theater of the Cruelty, and then we get to the contemporary postmodernism. And when I say contemporary, I do not mean 2000s. That's not what I mean. Don't think that's what I mean. So we're going to talk about that next week. So contemporary meaning in the last few decades. That's what we'll say. From Vietnam on. That's contemporary. Okay. Most of the post-Brechtian and postmodern theater techniques start from Brechtian ironic metaphor. So in this time period, this big year chunk, this half a century that we're talking about here, Brecht comes back in full force. He never went away. I mean, there's always been social theater going on, but in this, like, where people were protesting and trying to work for women's rights and trying to work for, ending the war and all of this stuff, Brecht comes back full force, and we get what's called the open theater. And this was something that started very small, and it was created by Joseph Chaikin in 1963. So Brecht was dead for about 10 years, I think. And it combined social improvisation with Brechtian techniques. So the open theater was a huge movement, and hopefully you remember this term, because environmental theater, experimental theater, they're all kind of umbrella terms. The open theater was a closed, shut encased theater company that rocked the theater world. So remember that. They used characters merely as vehicles to direct interactions with the audience. The audience was part of the show. They went through and asked the audience questions and talked with the audience. Some of the plays that they did, the audience was cast. The cast was audience members. Like, they'll pick 8 people and say, okay, you're in the show now. Here, get on stage, or get in the performance space. So it was very, very driven by that. It almost like going to an improv show where you pick people out of the audience. Improv took off after this, okay? So it's that same feeling, or going to Second City in Chicago, that same feeling of improv. The plays, if you're interested in this and you want to look up the open theater more, some of the plays that you might know of, Susan Yankowicz's Terminal. If you haven't read that play, get your hands on it and read it, or be in a production of it, or direct a production of it, because it's amazing. It's a little odd, but it's amazing. And Megan Terry wrote Viet Rock. Really cool show, too. I'll put these all in the description in case you want to read the plays. They're online, I think. And anyways, they were continually evolving workshop performances that addressed immediate audience concerns. And they would do things just like ask the audience, like, okay, we're all here together. What do you want to talk about? And someone would raise their hand and bring up a topic. This kind of theater is so dangerous. As theater artists and technicians, we're all like, we don't know what's going to happen. Oh gosh, it's so scary to stage. But it's so invigorating if you've ever seen a show like this where you determine what happens next. Or to stop a show midstream and say, okay, which choice should the character make? Or this idea make? It's very interesting. The Open Theater Company traveled all across America, all across Europe. They formed partnerships with some huge theater companies in America, and they would invite them in for stays, and they would do their shows there for weeks or months at a time. And it really was a huge movement and opened the door for so many other theaters. It ended in 1973, so it was very short-lived. It was 10 years. It was 10 years of groundbreaking theater. And I think you guys know when you go through that magical theater experience and then it's over, it's not really over. It's over for the time being, but that still lives on. And we owe so much to the open theater movement. Oh my God. Saturday Night Live, look at that show. It's on TV, I know, and it's not whatever. But it's so much audience interaction. It's so much improv. It's so much doing things that would have never been a possibility before. This shows you that theater doesn't have to be a rehearsed piece of character drama, and it really brought the audience into the forefront. So if you ever go see a show where you're part of the show, that's where it's coming from. It's coming from the open theater, and they opened that door for us. Yes. So the influence has been extraordinary. Okay. Okay, let's talk about Grotowski for a second, because I haven't gotten him. He has this essay. It's right here. I'm going to just show you this. You can just research this on the internet. It's free. Towards a Poor Theater. I love this. I love this so much. This is a modern idea about poor theater. And everybody that does theater that I know is poor. It's about doing theater that doesn't cost money, but to make a big statement. And I think it's worth mentioning, and I think it comes out of Brett's minimalist approach. I think it comes out of Artaud's need to move the audience. I think it comes out of the postmodern to mix genres of art. I think it comes out of a lot of that. And it seeks to define what is distinctively theater, what separates this activity from other categories of performance and spectacle. It really, really tries to make something classically theater with little else than what you have on your back. And I'm going to get into that and explain it. Grotowski believes that productions are detailed investigations of the actor and audience relationship. There are some shows that you can do that are about actors on stage, like 6 characters in search of an author, something like, yeah, Luigi Pirandello, yeah, okay. You know my memory, I'm trying. And there are shows about actors and audience members, and a lot of what he's advocating is these types of shows to really stretch the limits and to see what you think of as an audience is actually a stage piece of theater. Impulse and action are concurrent. The body vanishes, burns, and the spectator sees only a series of visible impulses. So there's a really cool quote I'm going to get to, but he's into impulse and saying in their training, so people go and they train at these different schools. Well, his version of training is to get the actor not the tools they need to become the character, but break down the boundaries that are keeping them from doing whatever the impulse they feel. So his highest trained actor is basically someone who has no inhibitions, that can just go from pure impulse and act out on stage whatever they feel inside. And to get to that is a huge, I mean, it's almost impossible. If we think about modern acting technique and what we learn historically, that getting on stage and doing whatever your heart's desire is impossible. But he says it's not. The cool quote I was going to say is... Okay. The requisitive state of mind is a passive readiness to realize an active role, a stake in which one does not want to do that, but rather resigns from not doing it. Let me read that again with the right emphasis. The requisitive state of mind is a passive readiness to realize an active role, a state in which one does not want to do that, but rather resigns from not doing it. So when the body says, no, I can't do that, I'm scared to do that, your internal impulse says no. Your ego says no, your head says no, your subconscious says no. Getting rid of all of that and just going. this is one of the biggest goals that a lot of actors that are in the impulse world strive to do, to be able to just be free of all of these external sources. And he's striving to do that and has this huge training program to be part of that. Look this up. If this is ringing bells for you, look it up and get involved with this kind of production and get involved with this kind of training, because it's out there. And that's just my job, is to tell you what's out there. He seeks to eliminate elements of natural behavior which obscure pure impulse. So your pure impulse might just be to scream, a shriek as loud as you can at a moment in time. Anything natural isn't impulsive because we've thought it through, or we're consciously thinking it through, subconsciously thinking it through. He's saying that nothing that is natural comes straight out of impulse. And so this acting is weird. It is very weird. But you can do it with no money. That's what it's called. Theater towards a poor theater. The acceptance of poverty in the theater, stripped of all that is not essential to it, revealed to us not only in the backbone of the medium, but also shows us the deep riches which lie within the art form. So as soon as you can get rid of everything that doesn't matter, all the magic, all the plot, all the characters, and just get down to pure impulse, you can see the magic that really is theater. What? I've never seen a show like this. A pure impulsive show? I've never seen one, but I would love to. So if you see Grotowski work out there, get on there and get some tickets and go experience it. I'm sure it's an experience. That's really exciting. That's happening in our lifetime. Today in theater, today meaning since like the 90s, most of the trends are not about something so much as they are about the art. So we're not doing topical theater very much anymore. We're doing art for art's sake, and we're doing this piece because we want to show this artistically. And I think that's really interesting. I always think of Spring Awakening when I hear that, because the play's old, and we're not just reinventing the play, but we were doing art for art. They were stretching the line between what was acceptable and how these kids felt on the inside, but they were also showing the rock concert aspect and pushing the boundary in that art form as well. And can a rock concert implicate how someone feels inside? I think that I could talk about that play and the postmodern era for hours, because it's so interesting, all the choices that were made with that production and all the choices with writing the music and the style of music, and then having the microphones on stage and really bridging that play and concert world. We see a lot of that in American Idiot too, but in a much different way. So it's about the art, and I think Spring Awakening, probably more than most things I've seen recently, really pushes the boundaries of what art is and what it can be. Okay, a postmodern work might also be said to deconstruct itself so as to make us think about ourselves as much as what we're seeing. So as soon as we see that, and then we self-reflect. So like I was mentioning with the heroine earlier, we self-reflect on what we thought we knew about heroin and addicts and addict behavior, and maybe we're changed from that. It causes us to self-reflect. A lot of the theater that you'll go see modern days, if it's not a revival, if it's something new, a lot of new theater is about self-reflection. TV, coincidentally, is going in the same direction. The show on Showtime, The Affair, is told from the first season, 2 different viewpoints, and now it's 4 different viewpoints. Really interesting show, and it's about inside and deconstructing the self and the perceptions that you have and how people see things differently and remember events differently. So TV's catching on to this as well, and yeah, check it out. Okay. Postmodern drama springs directly from the anti-realistic theory, but unlike most anti-realistic theaters, it has little, if any, of the modernist aesthetic or social optimism. So modern people came through with Andy Warhol and all that modernist stuff that came through and promoted the American dream and anything optimistic. Most of the theater coming out of postmodern is pretty dire and dismal in effect. It's sad. It's really sad theater. And things come and go, but people don't really pay to see happy theater unless it's family theater. But a lot of the new stuff that's coming out of the postmodern world is sad in nature. Again, self-reflective of our society. I'm reading some quotes here at the end, and I'm going to leave some time for questions. So I know I've been talking the whole time, and I just want you to know that I'm glossing over the stuff. If any of this is ringing true to you, please do more research or ask me more questions, because I've been researching it all week, and it takes a lot. You got to dig, because this is small stuff. This stuff was happening in the basements of factories and happening in dorm rooms. This theater is not readily available for most. You can't just get a book on it. So if you're interested in this type of theater and you want to know the history, start with Brecht, as I said, and then move forward and look for these little pockets that change history. Little teeny tiny companies change the whole theater and what theater could be, and that's so inspiring to me. I loved this whole week of research. Okay, this quote says, whereas the Brechtian epic theater was struggling to change the world and to create a higher level of society, none of these goals are deemed within the reach of the postmodernist, who proposes no higher levels of reality or social order. Because there is no higher reality to symbolize the postmodernist symbols, the postmodern is the art of the missing metaphor. It's a little bit hopeless. It's a little bit like Beckett, like the absurdist movement, where we just keep going back to the beginning, where we started, and there's no real hope. And I think that's a gross exaggeration. I don't think all shows are like this, but it's a trend. And of course in the 90s it was a major trend with the AIDS movement going through, huge trend. So that's kind of where we are. Postmodern art celebrates the apparent randomness or arbitrary juxtaposition, and it prides itself on not having logic and conviction, but rather on delightful surprise, even shock, and tantalizing irrelevancies. So if I were to do a whole lecture on this kind of theater, the postmodern apocalyptic theater after the happy times, I would compare it to absurdism. I think it's very, very similar. And while it does most of this theater have a plot, it is quite shocking, a lot of it, and it is, desperate in nature. Dada, I didn't even mention it. It was so short-lived, but it changed the world, proving that a little baby theater movement can change the world. Here we go. Last thing, get your questions ready. I will try to answer them with as much time as we have left. But Dada, this was in 1916, okay? But it keeps coming back. There's always these Dada, enthusiasts that keep bringing this theater movement back, and I love it. It makes me happy. It began in Zurich in 1916. It was a chaotic mix of music and poetry, dance, cabaret singing, recitations from Voltaire, and shouting in a kaleidoscopic environment of paintings. Wait, what? You just put everything together in a room, you just throw it all together, you got actors doing this, you got people reading poetry, and you make this, insane montage of events that you walk into and you are able to experience. I think that's pretty cool. I don't know if that's theater, performance art, or art at all. It's kind of like Jackson Pollock. We could debate it all day long, but somehow this theater keeps sticking around. There's a Dada play. Every time I go to New York, there's something Dada happening in Time Out. So it's not going anywhere. There are people that are very enthusiastic about this movement. Then we get this improv kind of thing, this chance poetry, where a person would go up on stage or in the middle of a field with an audience and pull words out of a hat and make poetry out of that. They started doing cabaret performances in this way. You're this character. This just like improv. This is your occupation. This is your age, and go. It was extremely popular in Berlin and Paris in the early 1920s. Seriously, everyone was into this Dada stuff. So I forgot to mention it. I should have mentioned it at the very beginning. But this crazy stuff, I don't know if it opened the door for Brecht, but it definitely was in his upbringing. So he didn't have strict theater rules. If he would have been born a little bit earlier, I think, he was born in the very end of the 1800s. If he would have been born a little bit earlier, he would have had strict notions of theater. But he was born in this time period where theater was all over the place. You had traditionalists doing Shakespeare, and you had, traditional pastoral dramas happening all over the place, and you had Commedia dell'arte, those people doing their thing, and then you had the Dadaists doing their thing. I mean, really, it was a crazy time. So I don't know whether that influenced him or not, but I can only imagine that at least gave him some lack of boundaries regarding the theater. Okay, I think that's all I have for you right now. I'm going to talk next week about so think of your questions while I close this out, if you have any. But I think next week I'm going to be talking about from 2010, from 2000 to 2010, and then as modern as I can possibly get after that, what theater has changed, because there was some huge changes that now that you know about Brecht and you know about the social theater aspect, I want to go back to the traditional and talk about the revival of the modern Broadway musical. I want to talk about new works that were happening and new ways of staging things and how that goes back to ritual. So we're going to talk about where the social action and theater came from and where it went. And then we're also going to look at people, like I was mentioning, the women artists that came in that never had a chance before. We're going to look at what some really great women have done, and we're going to look at what some really great acting techniques that have come out since the new 2000s. So I'm going to try to make it as relevant and fresh and new as I can. It's going to, again, take a lot of research because the stuff, people haven't studied it yet, and I'm going to try to make a history of something that's currently happening. I'm going to try. So hopefully that works out. I know a lot about what I want to talk about, but if you have things that you specifically want to know about, a certain show or a certain movement, I'm definitely going to talk about immersive theater, for sure. And I will talk about like fringe theater, and that's quite new and exciting and happening all over the place in that. And I'm going to talk about the ties to television and film with the new musicals that are coming out on NBC and some of the stage dramas and how some of them are being turned into films and vice versa, and the BBC that is streaming a lot of its plays so that we can watch them on the big screen in theaters. So I'm going to talk about that cross-hybrid kind of theatrical art form. I am talking about all of those things, but if you want to know anything else that's not in what I just said, please put it in the comment chat bar, because that stays up all week and I can just keep looking at it. I get a notification when you put something there, and I can keep looking at it and then add it to my research list so that I can try to give you as much current information as possible. I'm really excited. I know this was a lot of historical information to take in at one time, and hopefully you can kind of scroll back and watch it again throughout the week and really start to think of the shows you've seen recently, because I can imagine, especially if you're seeing, I know some of you are involved in the Caucasian Chalk Circle. Hopefully some of you watching, I saw it. So that was amazing. And I know that a lot of you are involved in the Laramie Project, and that was amazing too. And a lot of you are very, very interested in writing your own kind of experimental theater. So experimental theater, again, is a huge umbrella, but it is deeply rooted in some groundbreaking figures like Brecht and Artaud, and I'm really happy to be able to share that with you, because I don't know where else you would have learned it, because it's a dry topic. But thanks for listening. Does anybody have any questions? If not, I'm going to go sign off. I can't see if anyone's typing either. Oh, and I got a new camera. I'm really excited. Hopefully next week it'll be up and working. I'm going to be pre-filming videos now because I have a camera that's awesome. Not the one I'm using now. I know that's not awesome. But the camera that I have is awesome. You are welcome, Yvonne. You are very, very welcome. Hopefully, I know, it's a weird topic. Like, who wants to know about this? But those people that are watching, hopefully it's enlightened you a little bit. Because I find it very, very interesting. Go see a Brecht play. Yeah. Okay, well, that's all I have for you. And I hope you guys, you're welcome, Jack. I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead of you. And again, if you need anything, just email me or put it in the chat bar throughout the week, and I will address it next. I want to do some Dada too, for real. Like, let's just do it. Who has a basement? Seriously. You know what would be great for Dada is like a parking garage. Does anybody own a parking garage? Because you could do it on the multiple levels, and then you would hear the music. Oh, I'm all about this. We could. Okay, let's get that on the list. Plan it. Just get the space, and everybody bring your art, and we'll make metaphors happen. Yes. All right, bye guys.